Kansas City literally earned its spot on the map because of the two major rivers that could move people and goods through this area. The Missouri, which flows in from the north, and the Kansas, also known as the Kaw that joins in from the west. Over time, the confluence of these rivers developed into an attractive hub for trade, industry, railroads. But rivers can't always be controlled. And as our city grew, those waterways brought some intense flooding. By far, the worst of them all was Kansas City's flood of 1951.
How quickly these areas just became a lake was terrifying.
Named the Black Friday Flood, millions of gallons of toxic stew poured through the neighborhoods that sat near the rivers and into Kansas City's industrial center.
Worst floods in the Midwest's recorded history tear a path of devastation through Kansas and Missouri.
Just grab whatever you can because the water's coming.
Almost 1 million acres of land are inundated by the rising waters of the Kaw, the Blue, and the Missouri rivers.
It was a hellish landscape.
The flood was widely considered the worst natural disaster in Kansas City's history. And how residents responded in its aftermath shaped our identity for the second half of the century.
A lot of the heroes are the people that did the labor, on the ground labor to clean up those areas. I mean, I can't even imagine them. Kansas City rallied. It really did.
This is A People's History of Kansas City. I'm Suzanne Hogan. And on this episode, we're wading through the flood of 1951 and how it changed the course of the city. To help tell this story, I'm joined by my good friend and KCUR colleague, Frank Morris. He's been digging into all this. Hey, Frank.
Hi, Suzanne.
So this summer marked 75 years since this flood happened. It was a hugely destructive event, destroying and damaging 20,000 homes, 3,000 businesses, and 30,000 farms. A massive amount of livestock and other animals died. And yet, it seems like not many people today really know about it.
Yeah, you would think there would be like a statue of somebody, dragging a cow out of the water or, something. But there are some marks in buildings around the West Bottoms.
We could walk upstairs. There's a brass plaque on the second floor of the mezzanine.
So this friend of mine, John O'Brien, really interesting guy. He's done a bunch of work down in the West Bottoms, remodeling buildings, including the Livestock Exchange building, which is the iconic big square building, takes up a whole city block. It was there in the flood. It was there long before the flood. The second largest stockyards in the country. This was like a major price setting point for meat. It's like a black hole for pigs and cows, right? They come in, but they don't come out. They come out as pork chops and soap and other byproducts and all kinds of meat. John's done a bunch of work in there. He knows that building really well. He remodeled the bathrooms, he did the cafe, and he knew about a really nice, simple brass plaque in that building that showed where the water got up to.
So this is maybe not shin height. It's probably above my knee on the second floor of the Livestock Exchange building.
It says high water mark, 1951. And that really kind of gives you a creepy feeling. The surface was 18 feet above the street.
Dang.
All the cars are under, all the trucks are under, animals are swimming.
I'd be knee deep in it looking out across this flat, huge lake right now.
But this area is basically a big floodplain, right? Can you tell me about what happened in 1903?
Well, yeah, there was a great big, really super fancy, ornate kind of Harry Potter rail station down there. I mean, it was an enormous cluster of railroads coming in there, rail yards, and it still is. It flooded, wasn't the first time, but it was the worst time in '03, and that's why we have Union Station up on a hill now, because of that flood. But apparently, right after the '03 flood, they rebuilt really quickly, and the sort of common idea was, well, that was a once-in-a-lifetime thing. That's a 500-year flood. We're never going to see another one of those, until it flooded again in '09. And they're like, oh, okay, I guess we got to do something.
I guess this flooding thing is something we're going to have to figure out.
Yeah, in the floodplain where all the industry is for Kansas City. Yeah.
Well, so in what ways did the government, Army Corps of Engineers, try to address flooding in our area up until 1951?
There's a big discussion in Kansas City. There was a bunch of back and forth, lawsuits. And any way you address the flooding, it's going to cost somebody money. It's going to step on somebody's business. It's going to block a railroad track or whatever. So they argued and argued and argued about it. They start building levees and stuff. And then in the Great Depression with the New Deal, suddenly there's a bunch of federal money to help do that. So they were building up the levees, putting, concrete cores in some of them and building them up higher during that time. So they actually thought they were in pretty good shape in 1951.
Where does the story of the 1951 flood in Kansas City really begin?
Way out west, 300 miles west of here in western Kansas, the High Plains. In May 21, there is a catastrophic flood in Hays, Kansas. 5 people died in a flash flood there for a creek that was coming through town because they had 11 inches of rain in that whole area. It rained something like 4 times as much as normal in Kansas, and it wasn't just Kansas, also Nebraska, Missouri, parts of Missouri. It was just raining and raining and raining. Never had, to this day, on record, a wetter spring in Kansas in that spring of 1951. It was insane.
One of the lead researchers and people you spoke with was Jeremy Drew, and he's actually put together an exhibit about the 75th anniversary of the flood called Hell and High Water, the 1951 Kansas City flood.
It was really important to me with this exhibit that we talk about the people that were impacted.
He's a really interesting guy. He directs the Missouri Valley Room at the Kansas City Public Library.
Here's some of these photos. They were talking kind of a biblical rain, 40 straight days of rain.
This was actually 40 days plus.
It hit Manhattan, Kansas, Topeka, Lawrence, all of these towns along the Kaw River.
Ottawa on the Meridocene River, it gets hammered. Also, a bunch of little towns, like in the Flint Hills where the water gets channeled, because of the hills. When I'm familiar with Elmdale, that place just got crushed and it never returned. You go to Elmdale now and there's just like jungle around some of these houses that flooded in 51.
So the way rivers work is that water moves downstream to the next body of water. Were people in Kansas City worried about this rain in Kansas causing flooding for them?
Yeah, the Corps of Engineers was out there, Army Corps of Engineers was out there sandbagging and shoring up these levees. They were on it.
But at the time, there was this thinking that all this infrastructure that they had been working on would maybe hold it.
Yeah, I believe there was a memo from the Corps I think we're going to be okay here. They underestimated how much water was coming at them.
So it's early morning, Friday, July 13th, Friday the 13th. That's kind of like the landmark breaking point day when everything comes to a point. That was really early in the morning.
Right after midnight in Kansas City. So it's dark, probably a bunch of people out there sandbagging on the levees. Water comes up, and it starts spilling over in Argentine.
They were warning people to leave, to get out, but many of the people just wouldn't believe this.
Manuela Cruz Lozano is one of the many voices from flood survivors included in the library's exhibit. On the western edge of the Kansas City metro sat Argentine and Armourdale, bustling communities along the Kaw River, mostly made up of Mexican Americans who were mainly working in meat packing and the railroads. And as the waters continued to rise, they were ordered to evacuate.
Que el río se está levantando, y que el río se está levantando.
First, here is a local report just in. The Kansas City City Council has just declared a state of emergency in Kansas City, Missouri.
Yeah, and people freaked out because people could see it just coming up really quickly. There were people that were hiding in their upstairs rooms.
So we kept hearing over the radio, we know you're hiding, we know you're there, come out, because the dikes are ready to break and everything, and we were scared.
I had a pair of jeans on and a shirt, and that's all I had.
That's all we had.
I grabbed a sheet or a pillowcase and filled it with stuff.
The National Guard came by on their trucks, And they just, before we knew it, boomed right through our door and rushed up there and told us, you got to leave. And just grab whatever you can.
Evelyn Rojas Reyes and her family evacuated just in time.
Went over the viaduct and we turned around, and it's all of a sudden I see these hogs and houses and roosters, chickens and everything, and this, and it's like it went into the river.
This levee is already saturated with water. It's already been under a bunch of pressure from on. It's probably leaking underneath. Oh, and the sewers have already backed up. So there's already sewage backing up into the neighborhood. And over comes the water. You'd think like, okay, well, the water just got barely high enough to go over, and it started trickling over. It starts trickling over, and then it cuts a little channel, and then it cuts a big channel, and then poof, water's just like slamming into that part of the city, and it rises really fast.
Thankfully, there was the foresight of emergency response to say, hey, we need to evacuate. And that actually saved a lot of people's lives.
They evacuated not just in Argentine and Armourdale, but total 15,000 people.
Seeing the floodwaters on the Kaw, like raging under these railroad bridges, and you're like, oh my gosh, like it was that high.
They parked a coal train on one bridge to like help hold it down, because back in 2003, they lost almost all the bridges. Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, a lot of power. You just feel the power.
Argentine and Armourdale are already underwater. And what's next is the city's industrial area, the West Bottoms, where all this industry is. A lot of people had shown up to work that morning.
Yeah, Central Industrial District. They really thought they were in pretty good shape because they had the best levees. This is a really important part of town. And there's a lot of money there. There's a lot of money being created there every day. And so they showed up. They started, doing their stuff. In the morning, water starts coming through, and then suddenly it's pouring through, and suddenly this water is coming up really, really quickly in the stockyards in the Central Industrial District.
Now news by direct report. Both man and nature can be ruinous to the land. For a report on the ruins wrought by nature, we turn to station WDAF, Kansas City, and Walt Bodine.
This afternoon, the angry waters spilled over dikes into Kansas City's rich Central Industrial District.
Walt Bodine is kind of like the Kansas City Edward R. Murrow. He was the guy who was there when things were really bad.
Just back from the disaster scene in the Central Industrial section is Kansas City Star reporter Kim Clark. You saw the water start over the dikes, didn't you, Kim?
Yes, Walt. First wave splashed over the dike. Then it looked like the whole river was coming at us. Less than an hour later, water covered everything within half a mile of the river.
And did you have to hustle to get out?
I never knew I could start a car so fast.
And what else did you see?
Several buildings as large as an ordinary theater floated away like matchboxes. Thousands of squealing hogs were swept out of stockyards, most of them drowned.
You had dead pigs and cows, once it hit the stockyards. Not a couple, thousands. Animals are dying. They're not dying quietly. They're making a lot of noise. And then swimming ones, there's some of them are like taking refuge on roofs, and all kinds of nasty chemicals. And sewage, all the sewage is backing up, and rats, from the sewers are in there. So the smell and just the sight of it and the terror down there must have just been intense.
Some of the images, for me, are just really striking. People in second or third story buildings in boats, trying to get to safety. It's a pretty chaotic scene.
Some of them had to swim for it through all that stuff because the water came up so fast. And they're also busy trying to save the animals. That's money, And so they're getting these animals evacuated as quickly as they can. And it's like, oh, hell, I got to swim. Sounds pretty scary.
And then somehow things got even worse.
The next day on Southwest Boulevard, there were these big tanks holding gasoline and stuff. And they started to break loose and float downstream and then hit a building. And then flames are just like shooting up into the sky. And you can see there's burning gasoline on the top of the water. It looks like Pearl Harbor. It is really chilling.
Storage tanks of 2 oil companies exploded this afternoon on the west side. Firemen waded into floodwaters waist deep to battle the raging flames that threaten still other tanks in the area.
Filled with water and on fire, Kansas City looked like a ravaged, apocalyptic landscape.
I mean, this went on. This is an emergency catastrophe, ongoing, getting worse by the day for several days. Can you imagine? It's like you have this terrible flood and there's dead animals everywhere, and then boom, boom, stuff starts blowing up. And you're just like, oh God, what next? What's going to happen next?
In the southeastern part of the city, the Blue River was also flooding, forcing people to evacuate there. Emergency responders and volunteers headed to the front lines to try to help in any way that they could.
Southwest Boulevard, there were like 7 blocks that completely burned down. So you got floodwater that's like waist deep, and these buildings are burning down. Firefighters are out in the middle of this horrible, toxic stuff trying to put out. It took 3 days to put out those fires.
Another major point of concern was protecting the municipal airport north of the river and Wyandotte County's public utility plant. People frantically filled bags of sand to build a barrier, trying to control the water's path and keep it from infiltrating.
And by this time also, too, we had the water gotten into Fairfax Industrial District on the KCK side. Another 15,000, 20,000 people work down there. Levee breaks, goes in, and then it threatens the power plant for 180,000 people in KCK. And they really busted it sandbagging that plant, because if that goes out, if that gets knocked down, then everybody in Kansas City, Kansas is going to have to leave. They did a frantic sandbagging of that plant and were successful.
At what point did the waters begin to recede?
The flood crested. It was going down. So it wasn't rising. The water, it was still raining, but the water wasn't rising. And they could see the crest kind of come and go. It already passed Lawrence, for instance. I don't know how long it took for the street to be free of water again. And then just full of trash and debris and dead pigs and rats and, sewage. Everything starts to mildew and mold right away. And mud and ooze around the whole area.
In July, and it's hot.
It's super hot. I mean, it's going to get hotter. So it was a pretty ugly situation.
The cleaning up of animal carcasses was one issue specifically that Jeremy Druin talked about a lot.
There's a group, I believe, called the Dead Hogs Corps. They hired a lot of out-of-work stockyards workers, people that worked in the slaughterhouses, to remove those animals, because not everyone had the stomach to handle that kind of work.
At first they were just shoving them, let's just put this in the current and let it go somewhere to Missouri, and then people in Missouri oh, wait, no. And they had to do sort of a big mass grave. For all the animal carcasses.
And the rain just didn't stop either. I mean, the rain continued until the end of July pretty regularly. So you're also dealing with additional rain.
5 people in Kansas City lost their lives to the 1951 flood. At least that's what's been recorded.
That doesn't include people who may have died of exposure to chemicals later, or, depression and domestic abuse. That stuff skyrockets months after these kind of things.
As cleanup efforts began, President Harry S. Truman visited his hometown to assess the damage. He said the 1951 flood caused about $1 billion of damage. That would amount to about $12 billion today. Tens of thousands of homes were destroyed. For flood survivors in Argentine and Armourdale, who were the most affected, their lives were never the same.
Our house was entirely covered from all the way to the roof, top of the roof. You couldn't see it. It was only a 1-story house.
It must have been at least 2 months before the water receded far enough where we could.
And you stayed with this family?
Yes, they were very gracious folks.
A lot of our friends were displaced at that time, and we lost contact with.
After the flood, was life the same, or had it changed a lot for your family?
It changed for everybody that went through the flood. You know, we lost everything. We had to start over from scratch.
There was a pretty big, like $100 and some million federal relief act or relief, and apparently it didn't happen very quickly. Jeremy Drunt said that it was a little bit sluggish. People were getting annoyed.
Kansas City can be proud of how quickly we rallied the troops and created shelters for residents who were displaced.
But then there were also a bunch of construction companies and stuff, just rallying and getting busy and taking care of stuff. Churches were involved.
There was just a massive cleanup effort that took place before you could even really start the recovery process.
So Thomas Hart Benton from Neosho, Missouri, traveled to Kansas City after this flood. It had been big national news, and he was really moved by what he saw and created some really interesting artwork out of it.
The painting he did is, I think, particularly spooky, and it's messed up. So there's this kind of lumpy, elongated woman clasping her hands, and there's this house that looks like it's about to fall right over on her forehead. And then there's, a messed up car. There's debris hanging in this dead tree, and everything is just, akimbo, and it's a pretty moving painting. He did sketches and sent every single member of Congress a sketch of look at this terrible situation. And he wrote an eloquent letter, please, come on, let's get something going here.
Another iconic piece of art that came out of this is one titled The Kansas City Spirit. It's created by Norman Rockwell, who was invited by entrepreneur J.C. Hall, who owned Hallmark, to travel to the area after the disaster to create an image based off how our city was responding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Norman Rockwell, the big deal painter, super, super popular at the time, comes out, kind of caught what was kind of in the wind here, with all this civic involvement and just, people just pulling together in companies. And so he painted this great picture of this guy that's just standing like a colossus. He's taking up the whole frame of the picture.
The man, the engineer, holding some plans in one and rolling up his sleeve in the other arm. It's time to get to work. It's time to rebuild.
And he just looks determined and great, and it's just it's a strong painting. And it just makes you feel good about being from Kansas City.
It feels really classically badass.
Yeah. And, it's not like the guy's muscly or anything like that. He's just so determined and also smart. I've got it figured out.
So the rebuilding in the aftermath of this flood in a lot of ways energized the city. And there was a growth spurt and a lot of new construction through the 1950s, 60s, 70s. But some places never really recovered.
Argentine, Armourdale, they never got back to their pre-flood populations or vitality. And on the stockyards, they rebuilt them really quick. They restored that stuff. You had to, it was worth a lot of money. But by that time, the meat industry was starting to change. So none of these places really got back the way they were. But, they came back and became something kind of cool.
Abandoned warehouses for cheaper rent for
so
artists.
We had this
for a while.
This gigantic resource in Kansas City that was kind of like our little, thing we've got in our pocket, cheap space in really, really cool places, and a little entrepreneurial, go-gettery arts community down here in this, skeletal kind of abandoned area until, of course, it gets popular and then money starts flowing in. And now you've got a whole different other kind of thing happening there with a bunch of people and restaurants from Houston and whatever coming in now.
Definitely not cheap rent anymore.
No, it's just, evolving.
Are there any lessons, that we can take away from the 1951 flood?
The 1951 flood did do something kind of monumental. There's been this plan, the Pick Sloan plan. They had all these 100 and some dams that they wanted to build. And
this was part of a bigger national plan to do waterway management.
Right, exactly. It's part of the big dam era.
Yes.
Right. And But, for the Missouri River watershed, the longest river in the country, they had like 112 dams they wanted to build. But guess what? Everybody argues about that, and nobody wants to do it exactly, and there's this flood happens, and they're like, oh, we got to go. And so they really get busy, start building reservoirs in Kansas. And you got a bunch of them there today because of this flood. I believe it also just kind of like charged the whole effort. Like, oh, no, actually, well, we got to do this.
And a lot of the lakes in Kansas, which are mostly man-made, like Clinton and Perry, were all part of that bigger water management plan.
And it works pretty well. I mean, there's a big flood in 1993. It would have been a lot worse if it hadn't been for this whole system of levee, especially, upstream on the Missouri River. Gavin's Point, huge reservoirs and big dams up there. Those things fill up first, and then you let them down. You manage it. You let the water out before it fills up, and you try to move things along, and people complain and everything, but then it becomes a more controlled flood.
And Frank, as a longtime correspondent for NPR, you often get sent to the front lines when big natural disasters happen, and you've seen just how devastating floods continue to be in more recent years.
I've seen a lot of disasters, and every single one brings home, people are shocked that this could possibly happen. Oh, this building has been here for 100 years. The walls are a foot thick. It's made of bricks. How could it possibly have gone away? Well, it's all temporary. You don't own anything, and it's all going to go away. That's the lesson people learn over and over again in these floods. And mostly, people will lose everything. I'm talking to so many people who just lost their whole house, lost all their stuff. It's all spread around, waterlogged or whatever. I'll say, oh, well, that stuff doesn't matter. We're here alive. We still have our lives. So it, every single one of those things is kind of a reminder that this stuff is not permanent. None of it is. And you don't own any of it.
And take stock in what really matters.
Yeah.
You can read Frank's story and see some of those crazy photos from the 1951 flood at kcur.org/People's History. This episode of A People's History of Kansas City was reported by Frank Morris and produced and mixed by me, Suzanne Hogan. Editing by Mackenzie Martin and Gabe Rosenberg. Additional work from our intern, Seth Jaraus. Music from Blue Dot Sessions. You heard audio from the 2005 Oral History Project, Voices from the Past, Mexican Americans Tell Their Past, conducted by Dr. Jean Chavez, and interviews from the Kansas City Public Library's Hispanic Oral History Collection, conducted by librarian Irene Reese. We did a whole amazing episode about Irene Reese. You should check it out. It's called A Librarian's History of the West Side. Cue it up and give it a listen. And special thanks to our friends at the Missouri Valley Room, the local history branch at the Kansas City Public Library. They always have cool exhibits and materials to explore. You should totally pay them a visit. We are a production of KCUR Studios, a podcast network in Kansas City, and we'll be back next month with another episode about the underdogs, visionaries, and renegades who make Kansas City and the region what it is. Until then, I'm Suzanne Hogan. Take care, and thanks for listening.